and welcome back to the MILELE readings. We are going to be reading chapter 24 as well as 25 because it's a short chapter. Let's recap 23. In 23, Dr. Mark has pronounced Hope healthy, but she's still not quite herself. Of course, a lot of people want to know what she had experienced beyond the mispatch barrier while she was in Jennies. Among those are Vohan, whose behavior continues to increase in its strangeness, and he seems to be more fixated on her as well. And Governor Peter wanted to know more so for personal reasons because his entire family had been lost during the disaster, and he really wanted to know, what is this place like where his loved ones are now? Colonel Davenport, of course, was concerned about what Keiko would do once he learned that Hope had crossed the barrier. We also Hope shared a beautiful memory of Prince Adani, which affected Boa in a way he'd never experienced before. Agios had him go with him to the high point where he gave him some instructions regarding the future. And also Agios spoke with Boa about Lucas, because Lucas really is experiencing the ravages of the toxin. We read before how children under a certain age had E2 DNA, but after a certain age, that no longer protected them. And so this is where Lucas is at. So really, he has not yielded yet to Prince Adani for his own reasons. And so the childhood E2 DNA is no longer protecting him. So Agios, of course, promises to visit with Lucas. And Captain Nick, of course, has visited Boa with a concern about Vohan. So we'll find out what that is. And that's pretty much it. So let's move on to chapter 24 and then the brief 25. We're on the Mediterranean Sea. Nathan sat on a folding chair in one corner of the room where Judah was holding a meeting. The room was faintly lit by 2 oil lamps. It was slightly bigger than their assigned sleeping quarters, of which there were 3, 2 for the men and 1 for the women, as the number of women, including Faith, was only 3. A gathering of this sort had only taken place 2 other times during the weeks on board the large cargo ship. As much as it broke up the monotony, he still felt out of place among them. They still regarded him as dignitary, someone to be treated with much regard. Even his place in the corner was hard fought for, after they tried to seat him in the prominent place at the head of the small conference table. Now Judah stood there addressing the group. Nathan's hearing was tuned to Judah's voice, but his sight was trained on Faith. She sat in such a way that her back was mostly to him, though whenever she turned her head to the left, he could see her full profile. Since the day he'd kissed her, their relationship had gone south. He ran an impatient hand over his tight curls. His last full shower had been 3 days ago. The group mostly sponge bathed in order to conserve water. After all, they had to share with the actual crew who manned the ship, who were mostly unaware of their presence. There was a good number of wealthy owners of the participating ships, all staunch loyals, who did their part with die-hard commitment. Even the crewmates who knew were under heavy command to turn a blind eye. And so, as fugitives, they were fed and protected, but had to be kept out of sight. Even in the dim world of the mist, the waterways were patrolled. However, the biggest threat was piracy. More and more people were losing their lives at sea under the cruelty of waterway terrorists and criminals. In 4 days at most of us will transfer ship, and the other half will go inland to Italy. Judah paused, looking over heads in Nathan's direction. Mr. Kanisa will have a brief pause elsewhere, then continue on board with Faith. One of my men will shadow them for added protection. Faith could, indeed, protect him. That is, if she didn't cripple him first. The thought made Nathan smile, but he also felt restless. Being shipbound might keep them safe, but only if they managed to maintain their sanity. Cabin fever was a real thing. I know it's been difficult for some of us being squashed together for weeks on end, not knowing what to expect next, Judah continued. I've had to break up a few quarrels, but thankfully no fists. Quiet chuckles resulted from this. We still have a rough road ahead, but now the monotony will break. That's the good news. He paused for a moment, then took a deep breath. He threw his head back and raised powerful arms upward. I'm ever grateful for Prince Adani and his work through us. Everything may seem at odds with his plans to restore the world to himself and to bring his people to himself, lasting peace, and so on, but have faith. His work is being accomplished. Many are choosing the way of Prince Adani, and the agenda of the Weltschluss will not succeed. The agenda of the Weltschluss, Nathan thought to himself, where people do whatever only they think is right, where countries bow to the pressure of greed and power, where the world seeks to be its own master. Nathan sighed, shifting on his seat. He knew, even if the world wanted to be its own master, Keiko Bays would not allow it. He would rule the world. That was his greatest fight against Prince Adani. Judah continued. Prince Adani might not be here in body, but he's here in essence, and we are never out of his sight. His agents are here, and we, his people, are here. Keiko Bays would have us believe that he has the answers even before the world had plunged into chaos. Even before, it would have been impossible for him to fix the ills that continue to plague our world. Sickness, disease, murder, rape, suicide, hopelessness and despair, greed, famines. Only the one who brought the worlds into existence in the first place is able to fix it. To him alone we owe allegiance. The small group remained fixated on the energetic man before them. Nathan could feel their hope and exhilaration renew. He also sensed Agios's essence fueling them. He wondered if Hope was still okay. Was she safe? Keiko Bays would certainly not let him and his sister go, and especially now that he was a fugitive, Keiko's attention on Hope would increase. She had no way of knowing that he was no longer in Keiko's hands, and Keiko would try to have possession of her before the news of his escape reached Eden too. Perhaps we'll all meet again in this world. Judah's voice was hushed and his eyes glistened. Perhaps not until the next world. He focused on each person in turn. Whatever the outcome, we can be assured that Prince Adani has not left us alone. He will rule this world and free it from its darkness. He will bring everlasting light. Eden 2. Captain Nick stood close to Boa in an empty military office just outside the interrogation and debriefing chamber. Vohan Batten, is he or isn't he with the fishing crew now? Boa couldn't understand why the captain was so intense. Yes, he didn't accept the leadership of Agri 1, so he's fully on board with fishing. Why? The guy has surveillance constantly on the alert. For the past 2 weeks, he's been all over the map of Eden 2. For what reason, we don't know. Captain Nick paused and looked out the office door window. Alert. We've started tracking his steps and find him suspicious. Boa took a deep breath. I know he's been acting kind of weird lately, but I chalked it up to the Council of Nations forces out there. What are you thinking? Thinking? It's what we're seeing. Most of his suspicious activities have to do with Ms. Kanisa. I'd say 90% of them. With hope? What do you mean? Come here, Captain Nick commanded, pulling him by the elbow to a small desk area with a desktop computer and monitor. After swiveling the monitor so the screen faced them, he grabbed the keyboard and quickly logged in. He pulled a USB flash drive from his front pocket and inserted it in the computer. They both bent over the screen. It's all here, Captain Nick said. All of his suspicious movements. And look. He pointed at various parts of the screen where multiple screenshots had been made and uploaded. Ms. Kanisa is somewhere in the vicinity of all these shots. Sure enough, Boa could see for himself Hope in every single screenshot with Vohan Batten. They were not together, and she seemed unaware of him, but he was, in most cases, focused on her. As Captain Nick continued scrolling more screenshots into view, the chilling reality became clear. Their island princess was being stalked by a member of his fishing crew. How is this happening? What's going on? Boa searched Captain Nick's face. Does he have a thing for her? He didn't even know what to say. Vohan Batten was almost old enough to be Hope's father. Shaking his head, Captain Nick responded, We don't think so. We think it's completely different from that. Looking Boa straight in the eye, he gave a frightening explanation. We believe he's a spy. A spy? For who? The Council of Nations? For Keiko Bays? An unexplainable rush of wind suddenly filled the room. A third voice answered, Not for them, for the Weltschis. Boa's heart palpitated. He and Captain Nick both turned. Agios was there, inside the room, with the door still closed. Keep watch, but let him be. He will not touch her. He is here for a purpose. Agios's expression, as usual, showed no worry or distress, but there was something subtle there, as if he knew something they didn't. Boa looked at Captain Nick, whose expression, he was sure, mirrored his own. Disbelief and confusion. But, sir, Captain Nick started, then couldn't seem to find the words. His mouth opened and closed, then he shook his head and sighed, with a stubborn set to his lips. Then how is he here? Boa asked the question he was sure every Eden 2 dweller would want answered. How does he survive on Eden 2 if he's not one of us? Agios came closer to them, compassion in his eyes and a firmness to his mouth. You will understand. Everyone has a purpose in this life. Everyone also has a choice. His choice has put him here perfectly in the plan of Sovereign Emperor. He is allowed and able to survive here just for a time. His choice will also lead to his destruction. Before he came here, it was already established that he was no longer redeemable, a decision only Sovereign Emperor makes. Then do we not intervene in what we've seen? Captain Nick asked grimly, as if he still couldn't believe that he'd heard Agios's instructions correctly. Agios moved closer to Captain Nick. He placed one hand and cupped the side of Captain Nick's jaw and neck, cradling his face as a father would his son. Warn him as you would normally, but do not remove him. Agios patted the angular cheek and jaw reassuringly, then rested the same hand on the captain's broad shoulder. I promise he cannot touch her. He has not been allowed that. At his words, Captain Nick bowed his head, a sign of resignation and trust. Assurance filled Boa. What was it about Agios that made even a seasoned military captain yield time and time again? The man in them was stripped away, and they became like little children before this ambassador of Prince Adani. Now we are visiting a place we have not been before, Sicily. Nathan stumbled over uneven terrain as he followed Faith and their Sicilian contact up a winding dirt path. The Sicilian shone a flashlight torch guiding them ahead. So far, this was the first difficulty in their journey on land, considering how he and Faith had easily made it through a temporary, undermanned checkpoint with fake Council of Nations identification. Much had changed since the catastrophic event of over 5 years ago. Most of the people who traveled either worked for the Council of Nations, including an international military presence, or were ship merchants transporting much needed supply. Customs in most countries had become very lax, and much evil lurked in the dim world. Black markets for precious goods, drugs, weapons, human trafficking, and the so-called eaten to blood, usually from children, found other ways into countries. Being on a ship under the mist was one thing. Having to traverse land under it was another. Main roadways in the congested coastal town were dotted with light posts, but only every third or fourth one was lit, powered by local wind turbines. It was like seeing through a foggy night. Daytime was more tolerable. At least one could see adequately more than a meter ahead. Despite having experienced the mist many times in the last 5 years during his travels with Keiko Bays, Nathan still had difficulty adjusting. He felt claustrophobic, as if he were living under a burial shroud. His lungs were already experiencing the effects of direct contact with the warm, dry air. A mist with dry air. They'd been less exposed while at sea, tucked away in the cargo ship. A dry cough always accompanied breathing in the mist for the first 2 or 3 days until the body adjusted. Wearing a mask only prolonged the adjustment. Scientists were still unable to find the mist's composition. It seemed that no equipment on Earth was advanced enough to examine its unique structure. But fortunately, somehow, humans and animals seemed to adapt to it with no ill effects from it. It was unlike fog, smoke, or volcanic ash. How had Hope managed the even denser mist patch? His sister really was unique. Faith glanced back at him occasionally. She was still keeping him at a distance, very professional and polite. He hated it, but what could he do? Now she was his only hope of survival, his only way back to Eden 2. Will you be accompanying him the rest of the way? The Sicilian contact asked. His voice was hushed and a little breathless from their hurried pace. Yes, he has priority protection, Faith responded. She had her backpack hooked over one shoulder while she kept good pace behind their lead. A paved road was just a few meters ahead. "No need to explain. I know who he is." Suddenly, the contact stopped, shone his light ahead in different directions, then turned to look past her to Nathan. "Our ride is here." Just as they were about to continue, the sound of hurried footsteps reached them. Two large figures loomed ahead on the paved road to their left. "Step back!" their guide suddenly yelled, literally shoving his companions aside with his arms and body. As Faith stumbled back against him, Nathan instinctively wrapped his arm around her. The two figures were now between them and the road, waiting. Fear prickled Nathan's skin, and he could feel the tension in Faith's body. The ones ahead were like towering shadows in the dark. Their eyes were glowing, wolf-like, evil. "They can't harm us," Faith whispered. The tremor in her voice belied her words. "What do you mean?" Nathan whispered back. He was on edge. He'd heard of the wolf-eyed beings, but he'd never encountered one. Certainly not in any of his Council of Nations travels. He was experiencing some of what ordinary people dealt with on a regular basis in this desperate new world. "Be on your way," a strong voice spoke as another form came into view. This one's size matched the other two, but with a difference. The other two were clothed in darkness. The new arrival was enfolded in a soft glow, like a full moon on a foggy night. "That's why," Faith explained. Her body started relaxing. "Prince Adonis?" Nathan asked. "Yes, agent, a bright one." Faith turned to look up at him. "Prince Adonis' followers are protected." "And who are the others?" Nathan asked. She eased out of his arms. "They belong to the Velchkis." Wow, that's interesting. So we're seeing Nathan and Faith are able to meet, well, not really meet, but experience an agent of Prince Adani, but yeah, also the other ones. Okay, let's jump to 25 because it's a short chapter, and we're going to Jennies outside of time. Not for very long, of course. The once marvelous creature, Dragon, who had lost his former glory to his own greed and self-deception, even now continued to deceive himself that he would win, that the world and all humanity would worship him forever. After all, the world was once again ripe for a savior, and he had the perfect vessel of beauty, intelligence, and wealth groomed for such a time. The time for full empowerment of this chosen vessel loomed. Most of humanity had already conceded to the vessel, bowing to sensuality, greed, and power. Dragon quivered with anguished impatience in the void that contained his corruptible aura. But he also shook with relentless anger mixed with fear before the multitude of bright ones. These bright ones hindered his appearance before the sovereign emperor. "His all-sovereign majesty will not give you audience," a most bright one announced in a loud voice. Dragon writhed and contorted grotesquely, and he cast a baleful glare at the radiant one looming over him. "Gabriel, dare you come to hinder me? I am still allowed access. I demand to know why I have been blocked from the woman. Her doubt is my gateway. Then how is she still being kept from me?" The petitions from humanity have risen like sweet incense before his all-sovereign majesty. Your gateway has been obstructed. Your time is not yet. Not yet? When then? Wait! What are you doing? Gabriel lifted his arm, which held a massive golden sword. With a powerful side blade swipe, the void was sent hurtling through time. Gabriel! Gabriel turned his back on the scene, and the screeching was suddenly cut off. He looked up, alert. Now, send Raphael to the bride, and you go to Michael. This is what you will do. Gabriel listened intently. He bowed before the Almighty, all-sovereign one. The sovereign emperor turned to the sovereign prince. You have brought their petitions to me. Let us delay a little more and let your bride be healed. The prince looked upon his father in steadfast, undivided reverence. That takes us to the end of 25, and I look forward to being with you again for chapter 26. Take care.